Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Vedic Astrology podcast. My name is Fiona Marks, and I'm delighted to be hosting today. And I have with me a very special guest for me, my teacher, Ryan Kurczak. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, Fiona. Good to see you.
Thanks for being here.
No problem.
It's a joy to have you on this podcast because you were instrumental in the creation of the podcast. Do you want to say a little bit about your story of how this podcast began its life?
Well, I thought it'd be a great idea to have a podcast called the Vedic Astrology Podcast going along with the Astrology Podcast. So the idea came after a few talks with Chris Brennan, who is the host of the Astrology Podcast. So basically, I had that idea for many years and never had the time to do anything with it. And I tried to pass it on to one astrologer, and he didn't seem to want it. And then I thought, well, maybe you'll do something with it. And here you are.
Exactly. And it's been an amazing journey for me. Not something that I had ever imagined that I would experience. And I've learned so much and gained a lot through the experience and continue to.
Right.
Tell us then about your history and involvement with astrology, because this is something that you've been involved with for quite some time in your life, Vedic astrology.
Yeah, I have to say in the beginning, I didn't believe in astrology. I first learned, I'd known about astrology when I was in high school and so on, but, I would read the newspapers, or I would get the books on the sun signs, and I would always think, well, this could apply to anybody. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time with it. But then once I got involved in Kriya Yoga and meditation and Ayurveda, I was introduced to Vedic astrology. And I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was an interesting idea. And I ended up getting a session or two. And while I wasn't blown away by what people said, they picked up on enough little things that made me think there must be something to this. And so probably about a year or so after I began practicing meditation intensely and studying Ayurveda, I also started studying Vedic astrology. And in time, probably about 4 or 5 years after that, it became part of my profession, mainly because, again, I'm always surprised when it works. And as I was learning it, I was doing sessions for people just for free or for donation. And every time I would do it, it seemed to work a little bit better. And people were more interested in what was coming out of the session. And so after about 4 or 5 years, I thought to myself, well, I need to have a vocation that allows me to support myself and my family. And this seems to work pretty well. So essentially, I just started from that point forward, doing sessions, continuously studying, until eventually we came to maybe about 5 or 6 or a little more years ago, where we developed the Astral Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program. And that was my way of trying to take a body of knowledge and share it so that it fit together, it made sense, it built upon itself. Because what I often saw was when people were studying, and this was included myself when I studied, people would get the foundational principles, but they would often say, oh, well, I've got this. Now let's jump to this other topic, or let's jump to this other astrological technique or idea. And they ended up having like a hodgepodge of information that didn't really build upon itself. So the Astral Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program was my way of starting right at the beginning, at the bottom of what astrology needs to be built upon, and then slowly following Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra and the order in which the chapters are put together, build, a body of knowledge. So when students were done, their puzzle was more complete than it could have been, because you can still always add more pieces later on. But there was enough of it there that they could be a successful and skilled astrologer. So, and now we're here today. Yeah,
and that's very much how we're here today, Ryan, because that's how I know you. So for listeners, viewers, that was my introduction to Ryan. I'm aware in the background that you had a 52-week free course on YouTube. Was that like a training ground for the apprenticeship program? Is that where you developed how to teach it and how to break it down into the components?
That free video series was really my way of trying to lay out a map for people to study. It was also based on the book, The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, which was the first book that I co-authored with one of my teachers, Richard Fish. And mainly, I was just trying to put together, again, like a formula that people could build upon. And it became pretty popular. And there's a lot of good basic background information there for people who really want to just start to understand what's involved in understanding an astrological chart. So yeah, it was kind of the foundation, but I wasn't thinking of that at the time.
Okay. Yeah. And I arrived at Vedic astrology at the moment that you started teaching the apprenticeship. So there was a lot of luck and timing for me because I didn't know anything about astrology or about Vedic astrology. And I didn't know you, but I happened to Google.
Well, if you Googled me, you must know me.
No. I Googled, how do I learn Vedic astrology or learning Vedic astrology? And it's very interesting timing because I think I had Googled that same topic maybe 18 months or 2 years prior to that. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing really available. It was much more correspondence course, and it was just a different level of technology. And then at that particular moment in time, because of something that happened in my life, I had a moment to look at the internet, and there you were. And I enrolled, and in some ways I can be that proof is in the pudding, because I went from knowing nothing to this is what I do as my job. So, the theory that you've put behind the apprenticeship program is definitely demonstrated because I have built up that knowledge step by step. And of course, many people who take the program do already know something about astrology or are even practicing. But in my case, I didn't know anything at all.
I think your case is better, to be honest, because the problem that I had, again, I'm not in charge of the apprenticeship program anymore. You are, but one of the problems I had was individuals wanting to start, and they'll look at the syllabus and they'll say, "Well, can I start later on in the syllabus? Like, can I jump ahead because I know all this stuff?" It's like, well, you might think you know all this stuff, and maybe you do. But what I found is when I had that happen, well, I don't let it happen. But when I had that happen and I said, no, you need to start at the beginning, even individuals who had many years of astrological study, they had told me that they were glad they started way in the beginning because the apprenticeship program, the goal of it is to really get into the depth of what are the signs, what are the houses, how do the planets function in a way that it just really unveils what all these techniques are supposed to do. And so those who did listen and start at the beginning, no matter their previous background, the feedback I got was that they really benefited from it. And so if you don't have any background, that's even better, because then you're just starting with a clean slate, and it's got that kind of, I just look at it like a mountain or a pyramid or a puzzle where it kind of goes up gradually and everything kind of fits together from the bottom up, which I think is necessary if you're going to do astrology well.
Yeah, I feel lucky that I got to do it on a clean slate. I kind of snuck in, as I remember the requirements were, you had to have read the book and you had to have some general knowledge or something. And I was like, just snuck in through and under and got in. But what it went for me, it reminds me of building a house right on the foundation. Like I just laid the concrete slab and I built the house from the first brick up. Whereas I do notice that sometimes if people have already got an understanding of astrology, there might have to be some remodeling of the existing structure that you have. So
right.
It's different. But everyone that I've spoken to, because as Ryan mentioned, I now coordinate the program, but I also look after the apprentices who are finishing their year 4, their practicum year. So I get a chance to meet all of them and hang out with them once a week and hear their experiences. So I know many of the apprentices have come with some existing knowledge of astrology and have gained a lot of benefit from the process. Yeah, and we should say that a lot of people start with enthusiasm on the apprenticeship. Not that many people survive through to the end, huh?
No. And that's the way I set it up. to be fair, because, when I was doing it live, we'd have 300, not 300, we'd have, say, 60 people sign up to start a year, and I would sort of overlap the years. So 60 people would start. By the time we got to the beginning of year 3, there might be a quarter of those left. And by the time we got to year 4, maybe 4 or 5 left. And that's mainly, is it because the program is too hard? Possibly. But mainly, I think it's just what is required, because you have to write 2 or 3 papers each semester. There usually is about 3 semesters. And again, this is when we did them live. You had to do quizzes. To finish out the 4th year, you got to have 42 donation-based sessions. You got to do 3-hour-long YouTube videos showing that you can talk about astrology intelligently. You've got to do 3 10,000-word papers. So really, most of the time, it's just many people didn't have the staying power to keep up with the work involved.
Yeah. It certainly is a demanding program, but it brings great results because you're very focused and determined. The people that get through have shown that they are focused and determined, and we now are opening up assessment on the self-paced program as well. So that's available for those people who are doing it online. And I think it's always a great, and I used to say this to Ryan, it's always a great honor when someone will take the time to assess your work, because it's easy to put out educational content, but to follow that through and invest the time in checking that people are learning and applying and giving them the feedback, correcting where required. It's my experience as an adult that doesn't happen that often. When you're a kid, someone's always willing to invest in correcting you and helping you improve. But as an adult, not necessarily. So,
no. And the beautiful thing about it is, the people who've completed this program, these are the people that I would refer my family to, because I know what they know, and I know how they're going to do it. And I'm always just really happy, especially at the end of sort of the 3rd section, when you get into the timing of dasas and transits. And usually I would do an interview with people where I'd give them 2 charts to study for a couple months. And I just ask them questions about the chart, about timing, about dasas. And I haven't had anyone fail yet. And what's beautiful about it is that these are people all over. They don't really have a whole lot of interaction with each other because they're online, but I can ask them questions about the exact same chart and they will give me the exact same answer. And maybe that doesn't mean anything to people who are listening, but if you've ever talked to different astrologers with your own chart and you say, what's this about? And 10 different astrologers will tell you 10 different things. And to see the training such that they're able to zero in exactly on what the answer to these questions are, and for most of the time, 80% of the time, line up or have something very close or very similar to say, that just makes me thrilled, because it means that they understand the principles, the techniques, they understand how to figure out when someone asks a question like, when is this person going to have a health issue? What kind of health issue was it? And all the students can get within 20 feet of the ballpark, with a response. It makes me happy to see that, because it feels like it's turning astrology into a science in the sense of it being a little more replicable, repeatable, rather than just thousands of people with their intuition shooting in the dark to see if they can hit something correctly.
Yeah, I love that assessment. Although, of course, at the time I didn't love it. Like the amount of study that I think each of us put into that, because it is live with Ryan. It's the first time that we really back and forth on a live call. It's a bit of an interrogation.
Yes, exactly.
I loved that assessment because, like you said, I didn't used to believe in astrology or something. I don't feel the need to believe in astrology. It's not something that I've come to as a religion or as a philosophy that the principles must be correct. I need to believe in it. And like you, I get chills every time that it works. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So when you do an assessment on a chart where you don't know the name of the person, you don't know anything about their ethnicity, their background, you haven't seen a photo of them, and an examiner asks you random questions, like you don't get questions in advance, they're just whatever Ryan has chosen for the answers, and you get those answers in the ballpark of correct. It's very affirming, and I think that's what we all want as students of astrology, that given the same random chart, we would have the same insights, the same issues, and the quality control for the client. They can be guaranteed that they're getting the same level of service.
Right.
Fantastic. Right. It's great.
Yeah. It is, it's always just really neat to see that happen. I mean, the other day I talked about my sister's chart probably a year and a half ago or something like that. I just happened to look at it, and in conversation, I just threw out this idea. I was like, oh, well, when they go into this period, I'm sure that she's going to have a lot of success with her career and what she's interested in. And I just said that because of seeing somehow these principles lined up. And then my partner said to me, what was that you were saying about your sister the other day? And I went back and looked, and she just had a big success in her career. And sure enough, it lines up right with the dasas and the transits. So, seeing those kinds of things happen. I mean, I know that happens with all kinds of astrologers, but to me, it's always like a surprise. It's been 20 years now since I've been studying and practicing astrology. And what makes it fun, even though I don't practice anymore in the official sense, what makes it fun is that there's always the surprise of, wow, that did work.
I agree. It's like, it's very humbling, and it puts one's place in the universe suddenly in a new light. So, yeah. But Ryan, perhaps that's a really lovely segue into the topic that we wanted to speak about today, which was around transits, because it's something that astrologers are famous for and we're very interested in. But one of the challenges as an astrologer and as a consumer of astrological information is, how do we know which transits are important? And how do we know, as these things come across our news feed about various astrological events, an eclipse or a retrograde, how do we know which one of those to pay any attention to?
Yeah, well, that is an excellent question. It's a great question because, anyone who may know about my work or the work I've done in the past, I usually don't put out videos or make statements about, oh, this transit's happening, or this planet's going retrograde, or it's this eclipse. I usually don't do that. And the reason I didn't was primarily because it really depends on an individual's chart as to whether or not a transit or an eclipse is going to have a profound impact. For example, the last eclipse, everyone's going on and on about it, which they do about every eclipse, but in this one in particular, going on and on about it. And did anything profound or, out of the ordinary happen in my life? No, it didn't. It was just like every other day. And I even had a little bit of my superstition that, maybe I should stay inside and not, go out and see the eclipse and so on. But I did, and nothing happened. And before we started chatting here today, or recording this, I suppose, we talked about, I think, the eclipse of 2019. Was that what we were talking about?
Yeah.
We were mentioning that, and Corey Dowles is going to fill you in on this even more so later on. But we mentioned that, and why was that such a big eclipse? Well, that was such a big eclipse because of what was really going on in the chart during the time the eclipse was occurring. I mean, we had Jupiter, Ketu, Saturn, Pluto, all within something like 12 degrees of each other in the sign of Capricorn, or tropical Capricorn. And that's a huge deal. And, Uranus was in a trine from that position, if I recall correctly. So, of course, that's going to be a much more profound impact on worldly things. But we have to remember, eclipses occur, since we're talking about eclipses occur every 6 months or so. And so, do you really have any of these momentous, profound, powerful breakthroughs every 6 months? I don't. I mean, there was a period of time where it felt like that was happening, but that was really a short period of time. Or maybe you have a really sensitive eighth house, transformation and change. Well, then maybe, of course, eclipses are going to affect you more. But sometimes when you've got a chart that's really stable, that has a lot of grounding influences to it, transits don't necessarily hit you as hard as you think they should. Even retrograde planets. Planets go retrograde all the time. I think if I recall correctly, Mercury goes retrograde something like 3 times a year. I should probably look that up, but I think that's right. Do you know, Fiona? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm giving you a thumbs up on that one, Ryan. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I know it happens a lot. So Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year. Well, does everything break down 3 times a year? Well, it might if you have issues with Mercury. If you have a Mercury retrograde. So generally speaking, when it comes to looking at transits, to really figure out if a transit is going to impact you, it's very important, I think, to have an understanding of your chart given to you by an objective, well-educated astrologer, because then they can tell you when Saturn goes retrograde, when we have an eclipse over a certain point, this is what you should expect to feel or experience or have some kind of transformational breakthrough in. But otherwise, I would say you can probably safely ignore many of the things that we see in our news feeds about this happening, that happening, and so on, because otherwise it can just become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it's like those experiences where you're looking for a new Ford Bronco vehicle, and you look for it, and now that you're looking for it, now you see them everywhere. Before you had no idea. You're all just Toyota Corolla or Hyundai Elantra or something like that. But now you're looking for the Broncos, and so they're everywhere. So we want to try to avoid those self-fulfilling prophecies, at least the bad ones, I guess.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up that point. I think that once you set the mind to look for something, it's going to go out there and find it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we talk only about Mercury retrograde, then of course we're going to see during those 6 weeks of the retrograde more, my printer ran out of ink and my phone battery died and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. And I'm interested in so many things about what you're saying. And one is that, do you think it's an aspiration that one would become so centered in one's relationship with the core self that the weather of the transits doesn't affect one so much, that through the pursuit of meditation or other practices where we are becoming more aware of who we are, where our boundaries are, how to hold our energy. Do you think that's an aspiration, or do you think different people's different charts are more porous and less porous in their exposure to transits?
I think everything that you said is true. In the sense that there are some charts which are less sensitive. It may be that either they're less sensitive, so they just don't even notice it. I mean, you know, people who are just so dense that something could happen in their life and they really have no awareness of it. Or it could be that their life is just so well grounded and stable. Let's say that they do practice yoga or some kind of healthy lifestyle where they get enough sleep. They manage their resources well. They take care of their psychological well-being. Well, why do people freak out when things go wrong? Well, sometimes it's just because things go wrong, but oftentimes it's because they have such an accumulation of trauma and psychological complexes and inability to deal with the world in a healthy way that the slightest disturbance just makes their house of cards crumble. And that's something that we have to remember and also have some compassion for when people snap at us, or when we see individuals, not acting in a kind or healthy or benevolent way. Maybe it's not because they're bad people. Maybe it's because they've just got such an accumulation of trauma and psychological confusion that they don't know any better. They don't know how to respond in any way else. And so we can sometimes see that within the chart, and those kinds of individuals can be a little more susceptible, but that's because it's like if a famine is coming or a drought's coming, they don't have any jugs of water or they don't have any food supply. So of course they're going to go rampage and try to steal from everybody else. But if the person realizes that in this world, there's going to be famine, there's going to be drought, there's going to be abundance, there's going to be all these different changes, and they do their best within reason, not being neurotic, to prepare for it, then they're going to be less influenced when that happens, So there's that. And we can definitely get a sense of that in the chart. But the first part of the question that you brought up, I think, is extremely important, because you asked if, I think the idea was, can we become so centered in the self that these transits and these changes don't really phase us too much? Was that kind of what you were getting at?
Yep.
Yeah. And this is important because Vedic astrology, Jyotish, is often said to be the eye of the Veda, the eye of self-knowledge. And if you think about how it's often practiced, how is that even possible? How is running around worrying about this eclipse or that transit or this retrograde? And how is that really speaking to the eye of the Veda? Well, it's really not. It's just promoting more fear and more, giving away your power to external influences. And for astrology to be really the eye of the Veda, and I think we've got a few yugas, Y-U-G-A-S, yugas to go before we get there. It would work like this. You would know that you are a spiritual being, if you want to use that term, working through this life experience. And you would have a guru or a teacher or someone with more experience than you who understood astrology, could look at your astrological chart and say, these are your weak spots. These are your strengths. This is how you have to build up the weak spots so that they don't tear you down. This is how you play to your strengths. And those weak spots that you can't build up, or those strengths that you can't grow, this is how you develop the capacity for surrender, acceptance, those types of things. And if it was approached from that perspective, at least from my understanding now, that would really be speaking to the idea of the eye of the Veda, because what happens there, you're able to relate appropriately to the blueprint of this particular life expression that you have as an individual. But you would also simultaneously be developing non-attachment. You would be developing the ability to practice pratyahara, or withdrawing your awareness within, while simultaneously developing your capacity to experience oneness states, to realize what's going on behind the scenes of all this play and transformation. And if you could put all those pieces together and all those ways of working and understanding life, well, then, what would happen is you would realize that you're not this ever-changing phenomena. And when phenomena changed, when a person left you, or someone died, or you got a bunch of money, or you lost a bunch of money, or you became crippled, or you got a promotion in your job, you would see it as just a fluctuation in this infinite capacity for experience. And so you would naturally be more centered. You wouldn't get thrown off. You wouldn't be tripped up by anything, because you would see things for what they are. The idea between spirit, which is the eternal, and nature, which is the transitory. So I wish astrology's purpose was that in these days. But really, the purpose of all that is yoga and meditation. And if astrology can be utilized in a way to supplement that, all the better. But if it's supplementing more fear, or more giving away of one's personal power to external circumstances, it's not really playing into that idea of the eye of the Veda. I mean, I don't do astrology anymore, really, as far as doing sessions. I love the philosophy behind it, so I love supporting the teaching aspect of it. But why don't I do that? Well, enough life experiences have happened to me that personally, I don't care if Mercury is retrograde.
Yep.
I don't care if things are going to go well. I don't care if things are going to go badly, because you just got to, if it's bad, you got to find a way through it. it's working well, you enjoy it, but it's not going to last. You just keep rolling with it. And if you can get to that point, astrology is interesting, and it does have a profound, like I said, philosophical aspect to it. But I think that's a big ask in our current era. I would like to see it move more in that direction, and it is actually moving more in that direction compared to, say, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, where the astrologer just said, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be a horrible experience. And everyone said, oh my goodness, and let's run down and get some yagyas and do some japa and mantras and hope we survive. We have moved away from that more, fatalistic astrology. And I do feel that we are moving more towards astrology as a tool for understanding. But I would like to see it go a step further, where we let go of astrology as a way of trying to control our destiny. I don't think that's an accurate way to look at astrology. Maybe understand our destiny. That might be a better way to consider it.
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation, and it reminds me of something that you shared with us towards the end of the apprenticeship, or maybe privately in some of the catch-ups. But it's really stayed with me that if we think about the best way that we can understand what we're looking at in a chart, it is revealing the karma that this particular lifetime has available to be spent, cleared, detoxified, whatever verb you want to put there. And so therefore, in some ways, as the being that is represented in that chart, we should kind of be happy when karma is taking place. It's kind of when the shit is going down, or when the stuff is going down, if we think that we understand what this process is of reincarnation and experience through lifetimes, there should be a certain happiness that we're working our way through our karma.
Yeah. Well, what I would always say is when things would go wrong for myself or others, I would say, well, just say, thank God I'm done with that karma. And in order to be done with it, though, I do feel we have to try to learn from it. Because oftentimes much of the stuff that we experience, actually, however much I hate to say it, it seems that everything that happens to us has some kind of information behind it. When I think over the years, and I think of every situation that I wished had never happened, if I really paid attention, I learned something from that. And when I think about that, but even in spiritual circles, some yogis say that bad karma is a bigger blessing, because it's teaching you what it's showing you not to get all caught up in all this stuff. It's showing you not to lose yourself, not to not enjoy it, but it's showing you don't think that this is all there is. And difficult karmas, if you pay attention to them, and I don't want to, and many people don't want to, they drive you within, and that requires that you have to let go of a lot of your preconceptions about what you think is true or what you think is lasting. And so the more you get driven inward, and the more you're able to let go of piece by piece all the stuff that you thought was so important, eventually you truly become free, because you're no longer expecting anything to give you complete fulfillment. You're not expecting anything to give you complete fulfillment. And I had one meditation student who takes a little bit of an issue with these kinds of statements that I say, because he said it's completely unhelpful because it makes me feel like there's no point or purpose to life. And I said, no, that's not exactly what I'm getting at here. If you want to be supremely free, you have to let go of the thought that all of this changing phenomena is going to bring you any sense of lasting, complete fulfillment. The idea that comes in my mind, it's like thinking that the perfect relationship, or the perfect amount of money, or the perfect health, or the perfect house, or whatever, thinking that is going to really do it for you, is like watching a madman try to quench his thirst by eating dry sand. He's crazy. But he thinks there's something in his head that tells him over and over again, I need to eat more of this because it's going to quench my thirst. And every time he puts more sand in his mouth, he gets thirstier and thirstier. And he can't figure it out because he's crazy. And that most of us are that way. We keep thinking, give me this, get more Jupiter, get rid of some Saturn. I need a little more Venus. If I just had more of Mercury, that's what's going to do it. Those are things to know about so that you can interact appropriately with your life situation. But those are not things to think that if you just perfected them, that they're going to give you lifelong happiness and fulfillment.
Yeah, I feel that that's a journey that has changed for me. I think when I was younger, I did think that life was about improving. And I notice in what you're saying that you're sharing with us that you have learned things from karma, and that's how you let go maybe of the karmas. And I notice how everybody has slightly different journeys. I think for myself that I'm wondering if this is in Autobiography of a Yogi, which I know that you know much better than me, but I seem to remember, I feel like there's a story that I remember of like a sannyasi walking down the road, and he walks past some policemen on the horses, and the policeman's sword drops just at the moment, and the sannyasi's arm is amputated. Is this correct? Am I remembering something?
You're remembering the general idea of it.
Yeah, and the sannyasi just kind of, I think the policeman is like completely apologetic that, I had no idea what I was doing and I have no intention. And the sannyasi kind of picks up his arm and keeps walking, and he gets the blessing of reattaching the arm because of his detachment, his complete surrender to the moment that, his guru had tipped him off or whatever it was to be open to this experience. And when I read that, I think it opened me to the idea that one's karma can just be experienced, that maybe it's not a big teacher, that I have a big problem with horses or policemen or authority figures and that's why my arm got chopped off or whatever. There's just a whole lot of random karma. Right. And if one can stay open to the experience of life, that all this is happening for my best and highest good, then ta-da, karma experience, tick, keep moving on to the next time that, random stuff's going to happen.
And I know I don't have to tell you this, but just for the sake of clarifying, the idea of everything happens for the highest good. Well, I know how terrible that is to hear when you are in a horrible situation. Yeah. So, Fiona, we'll need to clarify that with her because she understands. But we're not saying, when you're in the most horrible situation, like, oh, this is just for my highest good. Yeah. When you're in that situation, it is perfectly fine to tap into your Saturn and wail, and to feel the pain and to feel the grief, and to not feel a sense of faith. But in time, let time, Saturn, heal those things. And we can look back and sometimes we can, recognize how there was some growth there. And I say sometimes because I don't know what makes the difference, but, some things happen and you just can't make peace with it. There's no way. Maybe it takes lifetimes, and that's a hard thing to swallow. But if we can try to contemplate, if we could make peace with something, if we could see it from a bigger perspective, if we can open up that, if we can open up the possibility to see it, well, then maybe some light might shine through in that regard. But again, when we say for the highest good does not always mean that we're going to be dancing on rainbows and lollipops afterwards. Yeah. Sometimes it means that we become a radically different person and we don't look anything at all like we did before. And that's okay too.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan, for that moment of compassion. I really appreciate your assistance in me not saying things that,
No, I know you don't mean it, but I understand. I know how people can take those things because I used to take it that way too. When people would, oh, it's for your highest good. And I would think, you know what?
That's right. I got a knuckle sandwich for that.
Yeah. I'll show you where that highest good needs to go.
That's right. All right. So a couple more things I want to explore. Could we just kick around some of the things in a chart that maybe make one more sensitive towards transits?
Yeah.
And some of the things that make one perhaps more dull or more grounded or more kaphic or,
Right.
And then, maybe we'll follow up with another question after that. But let's talk about areas in the chart that might make someone more porous or less porous towards transits.
Yeah. And from the first thing to consider is if it's a particular transit, say Mercury retrograde or a Mars transit, what do we need to know in order to see how is that going to affect someone? And first of all, what you would need to see is, are there problems with Mercury or the planet in question, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars? Are there problems with that planet in the chart? Meaning, is it being overtaken by malefic, cruel planets? Is it in a lot of negative Lajatati avasthas? Does it have low shad bala? What is the health of that planet? And if a planet is robust, it has good directional strength, it's in good dignity, it's a good, like a trinal lord, say, for the chart, or the ascendant lord, it's less likely that negative transits are going to positively or negatively impact that particular individual. So that's the first thing to really consider. The next thing is the person in a dasha of that planet? If you're in a Saturn dasha and Saturn is making some negative impacts through transit to your chart, you're more likely to actually feel the negative impact of that transit. Or let's say Saturn is negatively impacting the moon in your chart. Well, now, by transit, if Saturn's getting ready to do something negative to your natal moon, you're more likely to feel that because it's doing that in the chart. So the generally speaking, number one, what is the health of the planet in question? If it's robust, if it's well placed, if it's well supported, more than likely you're not going to have to worry about those negative transits, more than likely. If you are in a dasha of a particular planet, that will tell you to pay more attention to the transits of that planet. And if that planet is negatively impacting something else in your chart, you might want to watch when transits impact that something else, or that planet, or that house, because then that transit is going to bring up the issue. It's like, if someone's an alcoholic and they go into a bar, well, they're probably going to have some problems with drinking, with fighting, with passing out, with losing all of their money, because they have the natural weakness of, not that that's a weakness, who knows why that happens, but they have the natural predisposition of alcoholism. But if someone who's not an alcoholic walks into a bar, they're not afraid of passing out, losing all their money, getting drunk, getting in a fight, because they don't have the predisposition towards it. So it's always about really looking for, is there a predisposition in the person's chart that's going to make that more of an issue. And then as far as sort of more porosity or general strength, if a person's ascendant is strong, if the indications of their emotional nature, such as their moon and their Mercury, are strong, they're going to be less impacted physically, mentally, emotionally by transits, which means it's going to be like the person who's walking outside and it's raining and they've got an umbrella. Well, they knew better to bring an umbrella so they don't get wet, versus the person who hadn't thought about that and they walk outside, now they're just getting rained on. If a person has a lot of affliction to their moon, or a lot of affliction to their Mercury or to their ascendant, then negative transits or negative influences that happen real time are going to have a greater effect on the individual. And I don't know why I'm filled with so many analogies or metaphors, but the same thing happens, say, when it comes to money. If you've worked hard, lived below your means, not, wasted your money, and luckily not had a lot of huge medical bills or very traumatic things in that regard happen, and you've got a stash somewhere, well, then when the transit comes along for you to lose money, so what? You lost a couple $1,000s because you've got 300,000 in the bank somewhere, and that doesn't even faze you, versus someone who might not even have a penny, and all of a sudden they get hit with a bill for $3,000. That hurts much more, even though it's happening in the same way. Mm-hmm. Does this make sense, what I'm trying to say?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the things generally that I look at. And so when I used to do year-long reports, what was the first thing I would do? First thing I would do is I would look at what dasha period they were in. I would look to see what sub-dashas they were going to go through in that year. And then what I would start off with is looking at, okay, well, let's look at those planets and their strengths and their weaknesses and where are they placed. And then I'm going to analyze the Mahadasha Lord, the major Lord, and the minor Lord, and see what are they doing by transit for the duration of the year. And most of the time, that would give me a great start, a great sort of blueprint for what the person could expect. So that's how I look at it when I get started with transits.
Great, Ryan. Can I pick your brain about a couple of apprentice questions now I've got you on the spot? You mentioned directional strength. Do you think Digbala is important for transits, the ability of the person to hear that planet?
Yeah, Digbala, all of the Shadbala scores are important for what they're important for. And again, if you want to know more about that, I would recommend the Vedic Astrologer Apprenticeship Program, where we spend at least 6 to 8 or 9 weeks going over that. But Digbala directional strength, it tends to show me how much that planet is going to be felt. How much strength does that planet have? With how much force does that planet manifest? And so when we see a planet who has a lot of Digbala, it's going to be stronger, which means it could resist negative transits more. But it also means that if it's got Digbala, that it could tap into the positive transits more. If you've got the sun with a Digbala, and it's good for the chart, for the ascendant, and then they go through, every year the sun goes back to that point. Well, that's going to be a wonderful month-long period where they can put towards being more visible, into more promotion of their personality, of who they are, of developing leadership skills, because it's got strength. And once a year, it's always going to have strength like that, because it's going to transit that spot again. So yeah, I do think that Digbala is pretty important in that regard.
Yeah. And then I guess as you're speaking, Kala Bala comes to mind as well, right? Because it's what the person's going to remember, how resonating that particular transit is through the second of their birth, the minute of the birth, the hour of their birth, the day of the birth, the week of their birth, that how many times it's going to hit is going to leave an impression on the person.
And that's exactly right. Kalabala is another one of those, profoundly important aspects of Shadbala, because when something happens to a person, it affects everyone differently. Someone can have an experience again and again and again, and they barely even notice it. They're just like, what's that all about? And then another person has to happen to them once, and then they're just traumatized for the rest of their life. And it's dependent upon, that the planet that we're discussing, or the planet that's involved in that, and it's Kalabala's strength. So yeah, looking at that will show just what is the person going to notice, And so if a planet which deals with your emotional or mental aspect of your chart, or your capacity for happiness, has some Kalabala issues in the negative sense, well, you're going to tend to always get hit with a sense of negativity when that transit occurs. And it's like, again, looking for that Ford Bronco, you're going to see the negative experience everywhere. Someone looks at you wrong. You end up making a really nasty dinner where you trip and fall on your face. It's like, now all of a sudden everything is contributing to, see, everything's going terribly. And it's because with Kalabala, you're going to be paying attention to those things more. So that's a very good point too. Yeah.
Yeah. I exited the apprenticeship absolutely fascinated, obsessed with Lajatati Avasthas, but this is now my second year out of the apprenticeship. I'm obsessed with Shadbala, obsessed. Yeah. It's just the insights you get from Shadbala. Brilliant.
Well, Shadbala, you're right. Lajatati Avasthas, Shadbala, even the Vargas, those types of things are so important. But with Shadbala, many people say they're looking for a Raja Yoga or a yoga, one of the Bhava Yogas. It's going to do something wonderful. Well, if that planet doesn't have, say, for example, Digbala, it might not have the juice to actually give the results that your world famous astrologer told you it's supposed to. I mean, hopefully they know, about Kalabala and Shadbala and so on. But I've just heard a lot of people who at conferences and so on, they go on and on about all these things, and they wonder, why didn't it manifest? Why didn't this happen? And if you break it down, you start to see the planet, while it was in a spot that theoretically you can read the cookbook recipe that says this is what happens, but it didn't have the Ishta, it didn't have the Shadbala, it didn't have the support from its friends, it didn't have a positive yoga judgment score. So it didn't actually have the power to do that. It gave the idea, but not the follow through. So it's important to know all these things.
Yeah, it is. And that was the other one I wanted to ask you about, was positive yoga score or negative yoga score. Is that involved in transits as well?
Well, everything is going to be involved in transits, because it's just like reading a chart. Really, it's just progressed, like a progressed chart. I think in Western astrology. Forgive me if I didn't say that right, because I don't really know Western astrology, but it's a general idea, right? So if you have a planet that has a positive yoga judgment score, and again, that's a particular formula that comes from Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra. And say a positive transit occurs towards that planet, it's more likely to boost the possibility of the good karma, the good experience to come out. If a planet has a negative yoga judgment score, well, that's going to bring up the possibility of the more negative aspects of that to come out. So, for example, in the apprenticeship program where we learned about yoga judgment, in the book The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2, there's a whole big section which has second lord in the 10th house, third lord in the 11th house. It goes through all of those, the bhava yogas, and there's the positive possibility, like what it could do in a good way. And then there's the negative possibilities, what it can do in a bad way. I list those things. And so what was my issue when I was learning astrology? Well, how do you tell the difference? Well, one of the ways you tell the difference is you look at the yoga judgment score, and it's going to tell you if it's a positive yoga judgment score, you're going to pay more attention to the positive effects. If it's a negative yoga judgment score, you're going to pay attention to the negative effects. And that's going to be true with transits as well.
Yeah. And then we have those beautiful Jagrati avasthas and the Baladi avasthas, in that sometimes planets are asleep to what's coming for them. And that's quite interesting, isn't it? As an astrologer, you can be speaking to your client and you can be telling them something very clearly, and you can notice that it just will not penetrate into the awareness of the person.
Right. You're right. And that's, and the example I have for that I use most of the time when I teach, because when you bring this idea up, it's easy for people to say, well, maybe it's not that they don't understand. Maybe you just have it wrong as an astrologer. Now, I know that that's utterly possible. It's completely possible. It's literally possible. But I remember, and this has stuck with me, I was working with a woman, and she was telling me about her relationships. And I'm looking at the chart and the relationships, and there's Mars getting hit by Saturn. The Lord of that house was either in the 6th or the 8th. Anyway, there was a lot of influence towards violence and aggression in relationships from the partner. And so I said, it sounds to me like your tendency for your relationships is to have more aggression, more violence, more difficulty, more sudden breaks and changes. And she said, oh no, that's not true. I was like, okay. So I just tucked it away. And not more than 5 minutes later, she's explained to me about how her husband, when he gets mad, he took a shovel and like smashed the front windshield of their car and like shakes her and yells at her. And I'm thinking, let's rewind a little bit. But when I look, what's going on there? Those planets were asleep.
Yep.
And when you're in that kind of avashta, things can happen to you. And it's almost as if you're unaware or blind to what's really going on. But an outside observer would look and be like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's violence.
Yeah.
So I learned to trust more what the astrology says and just wait and listen, to see if there's just a little bit of lack of awareness sometimes for clients.
Yep, absolutely. Great. Thank you, Ryan, for going through the little fine details. Really enjoyed hearing a bit more about that.
Yeah.
Can I ask you one more question about transits and what's important? Can you tell us something about one of the things that's sort of unique to Vedic astrology are the vargas? And we can use vargas to observe transits as well. And this is sort of one of the things that we concentrate in that final semester that we shared together on timing and dasas. Now, neither of us have Carla in front of us, and hopefully people are listening to this so they can't see it anyway. So I'm not expecting that we can share too much about it. But could you give us some insight into how the vargas can be used to answer this question, which transits are important?
I actually do have Carla in front of me if you want to share my screen.
No. I don't want to, for those people who are listening, I don't want them to be like, Okay. So it's a good discipline for us to be non-visual.
Right. Okay. So I'm glad you brought up the idea of the vargas, because in my mind, I was thinking we need to talk about that because in my experience, the vargas are profoundly important when it comes to transits, because what creates the vargas is as a planet moves through a sign, it's like moving through a certain portion of the sign. And when it moves through that portion of the sign, it means that planet is in Aries in the D10 or the Dasamsha, the chart for great fruits and power in the world. And as it keeps going, it's going to go through every single one of these signs in the Varga chart. Now, the interesting thing is, using the D10 as an example, is that every time a planet goes through the actual zodiac, as it moves through a certain period of degrees, it's going to pop back into, say, Aries. So as it's going through Capricorn, it's going to be in Aries at some point. As it's going through another sign, it's going to be in Aries at some point in the Varga, right? So we don't necessarily think about this very often, but what I usually do and used to do when I would do transits is I would see, say, for example, let's say Saturn is in Pisces at 25 degrees of the D10. And this person is asking me about how do I brace myself for career obstacles or setbacks. Well, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to take a transit chart and I'm going to progress it, and I'm going to watch and see how often and when does Saturn keep popping back at 2503 of Pisces in the D10 or close to it. And I'm going to pay a lot of attention to that because it might be happening in a sign in the Rashi chart, the horoscope, that there's no planets there, that there's no obvious connection or aspect to Saturn in that Rashi chart, in that horoscope, but it's popped up in the D10 because it's like a fractal of the original chart. And often those are going to be very important time periods for the person related to 10th house things, right? Because we're talking about the D10. If someone has a question about their purpose in life, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the D9 Varga and I'm going to progress the original chart and watch and see by transit, when are some of these planets coming back to where they were in the D9? And that's going to happen at periods which you wouldn't see in the original Rashi chart, in the original horoscope. I love that technique. I've never seen anyone else doing it very often. But when I discovered it, I don't even remember how I discovered it, but when I discovered it, it was just beautiful because it filled in so many gaps related to, my client says that this happened. And I'm racking my brain. I don't see it in Dasha. I don't see it in transit on the Rashi chart. I don't see it anywhere. What's going on? But oftentimes, if you pull up the proper Varga, it's right there. Not always. I'm going to say maybe 80% of the time to be safe. But more than 79%, you're going to see some kind of influence there. So health issues or injuries, you look at the D30, financial issues, the D2, the D4, relationship, sexuality issues, procreation, creative issues, the D7, purpose in life, the D9, success and great things, the D10. If we can learn to see that.
Ryan, you're really generous to share that in the final course of the timing and dashas. You take us through step by step how to do that. So if people want to really learn how to use transits and Vargas, the apprenticeship is a great place to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Now, I think this is my final question, but every time I think I've got a final question. Did you perfect some of your insights into transits through reading Prajna?
That's a good question. Prajna is my favorite type of astrology to do. I would say yes, because when you're doing Prajna, you're really keeping track of what's going on, day by day, moment by moment, really. And when it comes to Prajna, why I love doing it, again, looking into the vargas and these types of things, it gives you greater insight and greater details. And just the more I did it, the more it drew me into the chart. And I started to see how transits are more than just, Jupiter going through Taurus, or Mercury going with the moon, or Mars and Mercury come together. It's more than just seeing those planets coming together in a sign or passing each other in the sky. You also have to see, all right, well, what degree is Mercury at? And what does that do throughout all the transits? What Lajatati avasthas are being formed real time? Like right now, when Jupiter is doing something in the sky, well, what Lajatati avasthas are being formed right now? And so essentially, when you're doing something like transits or prajna, what you're really looking at is the real-time pulse, the real-time life breath of astrology. And the more you know about astrology, you can apply that to transits. And that's really what gives transits their life. It gives it this fullness, which helps you to kind of weed through, it's Mercury retrograde again. Oh, great. Well, I remember the last 4 times an astrologer told me about that on Facebook, and nothing happened then. So you ignore it. And then finally one day comes along and Mercury is doing something for real this time in your chart with Lajatati avasthas. It's got a good shot bala. And now you miss it because you didn't pay attention to all those little, tentacles or connections that were going on there. So yes, to answer your question, yes.
Yeah. So I think that's a great way to hone one's skills. Gosh, Ryan, we've spoken a lot about transit. Is there anything else that was on your mind that you would like to share about how to identify what are the important transits?
The only thing I would say, other than what I've already covered, is if it's too much to get your mind around all these little details that we've discussed, because really there's a lot there. The most important thing to look at is to see if a transit is actually occurring on a sensitive point in your chart. Like, for example, let's take the eclipse or the nodes of the moon. Well, if they're happening on one of your natal planets from your birth chart, if they're happening on a sensitive point like the 8th cusp or the 4th cusp, and there's some weakness there, for example, they can happen on your 4th cusp, which deals with home and happiness and vehicles and fortunes and things. Well, if they happen there and you've got a lot of difficulty with that 4th cusp, well, then you can certainly expect to probably have some issues there. But if that 4th cusp is robust, is strong, like the planet has a lot of strength that owns it, has a lot of strength to it, you might not necessarily need to get so bent out of shape about it. So you need to look at your chart and the strengths of your chart, and are the transits happening on sensitive points? Now, in regards to transits, there's one more thing I would throw in there. Oftentimes we think of Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of the moon, as being just horrible experiences, and they can be. But let's say there's an eclipse happening, and let's say it's happening in Pisces and Virgo, and it's happening, but let's say Jupiter is exalted when this is happening. Well, Jupiter rules over Pisces. And so that means that the experience of Rahu is going to tend to be still crazy, but crazy in a beneficial way because the Lord of the node is doing well. And so this is something that we discuss in the apprenticeship program where we get to Rahu and Ketu, and how you just can't say Rahu and Ketu are going to cause all these problems. You have to look and see, is the Lord of Rahu and Ketu good? Is the house Rahu and Ketu is in strong? Is Saturn for Rahu, Mars for Ketu? How are they doing? You have to look at all these things, because then the nodes might act more beneficial. So when you see the doom and gloom that people put out there, it might not happen, because they are well supported. So we really have to kind of spend our time assessing the state of the planets in question, both in our own birth chart and also by transit, before we can make a real good proclamation about what's going to happen with them, one that's going to be accurate and a little more precise.
Wonderful. Ryan, thank you so much for your time talking about transits. Before I let you go, let's preview some of the things that are coming up in your life astrologically, because I believe there is a book.
Oh,
oh, you thought I was going to read your transits, didn't you?
Yeah. I was surprised. Like, oh, okay, I get a transit session.
Yeah, that's right. No, I believe there's a book that's on its way.
We are working on a potentially a few books, and they are based on the writings from the actual Vedic astrology apprentices. I mentioned they had to write a lot of papers. Well, many of those papers turned out to be very good. So it came to my mind to put them in a book format, which starts with going through bhavas, rashis, planets, and so on. It goes in the same progression of the actual apprenticeship program. And that way people can learn from what our students have learned from. So yeah, that could potentially be 3 to 4 books based on the amount of material that we have. But right now we are slowly going through one book, but ideally maybe next year, 2022, at the longest 2023. I really want to make sure that we get all the there's no problems with the astrological content. It's all the run-on sentences that I'm having problems with.
Well, perhaps we could welcome you back to the podcast when the book is ready. Yeah. We'd love to, and maybe we can get some of the authors of these papers and yourself. We could really celebrate that book.
That'd be great.
And any other time that you would be available to come back, we would be delighted to hear more of your insights, your experience, and your generous sharing about astrology. Thank you, Ryan Kurczak, so much for your time today.
Yeah. And those of you who are listening, if there's anything in particular that you have questions about that you'd like us to discuss, don't hesitate to send them in, and we'll review and maybe do a few more episodes.
Oh, I'd love that. Okay. Thank you. And thanks everyone for your time.
It's great to see you.
Bye.